attributes and documentation, and also cover some aspect of requirement specification. That's what I intend for us today, to cover requirement attributes and documentation formats, then cover requirement specification, that is solution requirement specification. So let's see if we can go as far as possible. Confirm when you can see my screen so that we can commence.
I can see.
Okay, thank you. So today we'll be looking at requirement attributes, and under requirement attributes, we'll be looking at characteristics of a requirement, right? We already know what a requirement is. We're looking at high level requirements log, which is HLR, which is a type or format of requirement documentation. We'll be looking at BRD, which is also another format of requirement documentation. Looking at FRD, which is functional requirement document. Looking at software requirement specification, and then epics, user stories, and acceptance criteria. So let's just jump right in. So requirement documentation is basically the process of recapturing, translating, and communicating requirements of an initiative by stating what needs to be done to satisfy the business and stakeholder needs within a context. The initiative could be the development of a software product, or could be the designing of a social program, or even possibly the improvements and also the improvement of a process or organizing an event, irrespective of whatever initiative or project or activity or change that you are involved with. You need to ensure you document the requirements. They might not be called requirements, they could be called something else, but you need to document it, right? You need to capture them. For instance, you want to organize an event. Let's say Uptrust want to organize a a campus event, right? Whereby I want to go to schools, and when we get to schools, we'll be able to educate them, especially university schools, educate students on what business analysis is, how to become a business analyst, how to start a career. But that event, there are sets of requirements that needs to be fulfilled, right? Things like um the date of the event, the agenda of the event, the venue, logistics, and all of that. So those requirements, we need to document those requirements. And in documenting those requirements, we don't just document them from the top of our head. We need to capture those requirements from stakeholders, right? From the school authority, from the management of Uptrust, from the end users. We need to also translate those requirements, right, to terminologies that event setup or event planners are going to understand, and then communicate them. So that is what we do when we are trying to document and also specify requirements. So requirement analysis mostly occurs during the point of documentation, and it is essential and significant in its own sets because it occurs most times immediately after requirement elicitation has occurred. As a business analyst, you will need to refine and synthesize, even scrutinize the requirements that you have gathered from stakeholders to ensure that it is consistent and unambiguous. Requirements analysis reviews all the requirements and usually provides a graphical view of the entire system after the completion of the analysis. The business analyst also keeps constant interaction with the customer to clarify points of confusion and to understand which requirements are more important than others. In requirement, there's what we call prioritization, right? If we are to build a if you are to build an e-voting solution, for instance, something that allows people to cast their vote online, or if you are to build an online shopping mall, that's an e-commerce, or if you are to build an e-learning platform, there'll be so many functionalities and features that we need to implement. But the truth is that in all of them, some of those functionalities and features, some are more important than the others. So in interacting with stakeholders and customers, we have to understand which of those requirements is more important. Requirement analysis requires a good level of attention to detail and ensuring that no requirement is left in isolation or not properly specified. High quality requirements are documented, actionable, measurable, testable, traceable, and also they help to identify business opportunities and are defined to facilitate system design. So it is very important that business analysts basically specify the requirements that they have gotten from stakeholders and then go further ahead to modeling those requirements to provide clarity to the technical team. So what do I mean? So I know you guys, your next task will be to elicit requirements. So when you are eliciting requirements, as we spoke last week, you're basically trying to get understanding of what is required to be done or what needs to be done, right? Now, in getting that understanding from stakeholders, you then go ahead to document, or should I say, analyze your requirements. By the time you analyze your requirements, or should I say, specify your requirements in user stories or use case scenarios, or probably on high level requirements, you can share that with your stakeholders so as to validate that what you have specified is in line with what you have elicited from them. After they have confirmed or you've gained validation from them, then you can go ahead to model your requirement by drawing technical components, structures that will represent how the system should function and what the system should do, right? These technical components or functions would help to communicate to the developers, to the technical team, how they ought to understand and implement the solution. So for the business analyst to effectively document a requirement in any document, a business analyst must ensure that the requirements can be evaluated through some set of metrics. There are some metrics that are used to evaluate requirements, especially user stories. Things like invest, which means the requirement should be independable, negotiable, valuable, estimable, should be traceable and testable, right? Things like smart means that the requirement should be simple, measurable, accurate or accountable, should be reliable, and should be time bound, right? Or even things like octopt, which we are going to look much more later in the course of today's training. So all of these metrics helps you to evaluate your requirement and ask yourself, is this requirement independent? Is it negotiable? Negotiable in the sense that can we negotiate our way to understanding if we can break these requirements further or we cannot break it further, right? Is it independent in the sense that on its own, does it give a full understanding of what needs to be done? So let's take a look at some of these metrics that are um, used to evaluate a requirement to know if that requirement is good or not. Starting with invest, right? A good requirement needs to be independent. That is letter I in invest. It needs to be independent, which means it should be at a very low level of details and should not be possible to be separated out into components. What do I mean? When you write a user story, your user story should be independent in the sense that you shouldn't go ahead breaking your user story down again, right? So every user story should be able to stand on their own. The only thing that you can go ahead to break down would be your epic. So your user story should be as independent as possible. Also, your requirements should be negotiable, which means that you have more analysis and discussions with stakeholders. So when you have written a requirement, you need to have conversations with stakeholders around that requirement. Have more analysis with stakeholders around that requirement. The requirement also should be valuable, which means you should be able to deliver value to stakeholders by satisfying the needs of your stakeholders. So your stakeholders have specific needs. For every requirement you write, it should represent a value. So a user story is a requirement that represents a piece of value. So that's why I said before coming here, I said that we use the invest specifically for the user story. So it needs to provide a specific amount of value. If it's not delivering value to stakeholders, then it is not a user story. It is not a requirement. So a good requirement needs to be valuable, which means it should deliver value to stakeholders by satisfying the need of stakeholders. Also, in letter E, under invest, your requirement should be estimable. That means it should be possible for the team to plan how long it will take them to implement the requirements, the efforts that will be put into developing that particular requirement, that particular piece of value. So your requirement should be estimable. A good requirement needs to be small as possible. That your user story needs to be small, which means it should not be so big as to become impossible to plan, tax, prioritize within a level of accuracy. A good requirement as well needs to be testable, which means it must provide the necessary information to make test development possible. So that is why for every user story you write, there needs to be an acceptance criteria, which the quality assurance or the testers need to use to test to ensure that that requirement is functioning well. Another type or attribute of requirement that I mentioned earlier is the octopt, which basically helps to explain the model and all of that, right? So octopt consists of letter A, I mean number A standing for atomic, U for uniquely identifiable, C for complete, T for traceable, C again for consistent and unambiguous, P for prioritized, and T again for testable. The difference between this one and the invest is that invest is strictly for user stories. We use invest to evaluate the quality of a user stories, but we use octopt to evaluate the quality of any requirement you are writing. So let's take a look at examples of requirements that are being evaluated using each component of the octopt, and we'll be looking at it in line with an e-learning platform or educational platform where students will go to register for courses, lecturers will go to register and sign up, and what have you, right? So let's start. So we'll be looking at good and bad requirements. So when the requirement is atomic, how remember that atomic means that it should be at a very low level of details and it should not be possible to be separated into different components, right? Now, a bad requirement in this instance will be that students will be able to enroll to undergraduate and postgraduate courses, right? So we have a requirement that says students should be able to enroll to undergraduate and postgraduate courses, right? For this particular requirement, you can see that it is not atomic in a sense that it can be further broken down into various components, such as we have in the left side that says students, number one, students will be able to enroll to undergraduate courses. And then number two, students will be able to enroll to postgraduate courses. So we see that we've been able to break the unatomic nature of the requirement to the right to the left one, making it two requirements. In that way, it's now atomic. It can't be broken further any longer. Now, we might feel, oh, we'll finish this requirement and this requirement is perfect this way. But let's go further and look at another criteria which would help us to better understand the requirement. Another criteria is that our requirements should be uniquely identified. So it is very important as BA to separate out requirements with unique identifications, with unique IDs. Looking at the bad requirement or the improper requirements to the right, it says students will be able to enroll to undergraduate studies, number one. Also, breaking it further and say students will also be able to enroll to postgraduate study, just like we had in the previous requirement, right? We might feel, oh, we've gotten it, but to make sure that our requirement is well written, we can all put them in an epic. An epic is like a parent's requirement, and say we have courses. Under courses 1.1, students will be able to enroll to undergraduate courses. Then under courses 1.2, students will be able to enroll to postgraduate courses. So we have been able to separate the requirements, but they have the same ID number as we saw in the right side. So for every requirement you write, your requirement must, and is in the case of must have a uniquely identified ID. Okay, so you let's say for instance you are building a solutions and you are writing the high level requirements. You can say HLR. That's HLR stands for high level requirements. HLR 001, HLR 002, HLR 003, HLR 004, HLR 005. You get to see that when I start showing you sample requirement documentations later in the part of the session. Now, the next one we look at is that a requirement needs to be complete. If you allow loose ends in your requirements, it will become a very big issue. What do I mean? When you write a requirement or when you specify a requirement and it's not complete, that means you are creating room for stakeholders to be able to make assumptions on how complete the requirement should look like. So at the point of implementation, your stakeholders could basically assume that, oh, maybe this should be here and this should not be here. So your requirement needs to be complete. Each requirement should be complete. Whenever the information is not clearly stated, this can result in scope creep and bad implementation of the business needs by the technical team. Looking at the requirement to the right, it says a professor user will log into the system by providing his username, password, and other relevant information. Now, other relevant information could be maybe their first name, it could be their last name, it could be their date of birth, it could be their departments, it could be the courses they are lecturing, it could be their professorship ID, it could be their age, it could be their address, it could be their location, it could be their gender, it could be their height, it could be anything, right? In this kind of requirement, you can see that the requirement is not complete because it provides room for loose ends and scope creep. Because if you tell me to build this, and I might start thinking, so what other relevant information can we have for this particular professor to be able to log into the system, right? And thereby we begin to have loose ends and scope creep. But a well-defined and stated requirement to the left will say that a professor user will log into the system by providing his username, password, and department code. With this way, we understand that there are basically three credentials that a professor user will need to provide, or that a professor will need to provide. Number one is his username. So if I'm a professor, my username could be Genesis 2024, right? My password could be Genesis 3036. And my department code, maybe I'm lecturing in the department of pure and applied physics, right? And pure and applied physics code could be PA021, right? So I need to provide these three credentials before I'll be able to log in as a professor user or as a professor on the e-learning platform. In that way, you see that the requirement is complete. There are no loose ends. It is standard. Another criteria or another metric is that our requirement should be traceable. Each and every requirement should be traceable because there are different levels of requirements. Now, when we convert business requirements into requirements type, there has to be traceability, which means that we should be able to take each and every business requirements and map it to the corresponding one or more the corresponding one or more software requirements. For instance, when we give a bad requirement that says maintain students' information mapped to BRD requirement one, BRD requirement ID, we realize that we are not really mapping it as they ought to go, because what is BRD requirement ID? Nobody knows which specific requirement you are speaking to. But when you say maintain student requirements on the left-hand side, maps to BRD requirements ID 3.1. It means that we should be able to maintain that requirement based on what is stated in the BRD for requirements ID 3.1. In this way, we can easily trace a requirement, we can easily map our requirements. Another characteristics or attribute is that your requirement needs to be prioritized, just as I mentioned earlier. Not everything have, not all requirements have the same level of importance. Some will have higher priority, others will have lower priority, right? So we need to ensure that we are able to prioritize our requirements accordingly, right? A good example is when we have list of requirements here and they all have the same priority of one. Saying registered student has a priority of 1, maintain user information has a priority of 1, enroll courses has a priority of 1, view report card has a priority of 1, right? In all of this, you see that the team will be confused in delivering on this project because you're giving them everything to have the same priority. But here we have registered student priority of 1, maintain user information having a priority of 2, enrolling of courses having priority of 1, viewing report card having priority of 3. So if you are not able to assign appropriate prioritization or priority to a particular requirement, it will be difficult for the team to deliver value on implementation, right? So you need to try to realize or understand which requirement has a higher priority. And sometimes priority could be dependent on several things. So we are going to have a session whereby I'll teach you guys how to determine priority of a particular requirement. So priority could be dependent on several things. It could be dependent on time of delivery, could be dependent on business value, it could be dependent on regulatory compliance, it could be dependent on dependency of implementation, it could be dependent on a lot of things, right? So I'll show you guys how to basically determine priority of requirements in the later course of the program. Now, another characteristic is that our requirements needs to be consistent and unambiguous. What do I mean? If you are using a particular terminology to represent a particular group of stakeholders, ensure that that terminology is consistent for your stakeholders. Let's say, for instance, you are using a terminology of customers to represent a particular set of stakeholders. If you go to another requirement and you use user instead of customers, then you realize that your requirement is not consistent. Your terminologies are not consistent. So an example of a bad requirement is that a student will have either undergraduate courses or postgraduate courses, but not both, right? And then you now go ahead and say in another place that some courses will be open to both undergraduate and postgraduate courses. You're basically trying to confuse your stakeholders that, oh, students can have access to undergraduate and postgraduate courses, and they can't have access to both. And then you come here and say, there are some courses that will be open to both undergraduate and postgraduate courses, students rather. You're basically confusing your stakeholders. A good requirement will be that students will have either undergraduate courses or postgraduate courses, but they can't have both. So you are clear that they can have one or have the other, but they can't have both of them together. Rather than stating it here and then going again to annul your statement in another requirement. Now, the last piece of characteristics of very good of requirement that we'll be looking at is that your requirement should be testable. You should be able to test your requirements against some level of criteria, right? And a testable requirement, for instance, is that each page of the system will load in an acceptable time frame. You realize that if I say this should load in an acceptable time frame, what is a time frame? Right? If I'm testing, I might say, let me test with 5 minutes, since there's no specific time frame. Let me test with 10 minutes. Let me test with 1 minute. So as a business analyst, you should be able to be clear enough so that your stakeholders will understand the criteria that are needed for that particular requirement. So you could say register students and enroll courses page of the system will load within 5 seconds. It means that when we are testing this feature of student registration and course enrollment, if they don't load up, or if the page does not load within 5 seconds, then we know that the implementation has failed. We escalate or we report that the test failed and they need to go and rebuild to ensure that these pages load within 5 seconds. In this way, our requirements are testable, right? So that basically brings us to the attributes of a requirement. So we'll go ahead to look at the various formats we document a requirement, the various formats in which we basically document sets of requirements. So number one on the list is that before we even talk about requirement documentation, we need to understand how do we basically write requirements. Most times requirements takes the shall composition, SHALL, the shall single statement composition that says a customer shall be able to transfer funds between their accounts. So a complete set of high-level requirements are expected to be captured, which is elicited and signed off by our stakeholders. Assuming that the project continues, these high-level requirements they basically act as a context for detailed requirements, right? We call them high-level requirements because they are very high in the sense that they speak business. Business stakeholders can easily understand what we are talking about, right? And the details behind each high-level requirements are elicited from subject matter experts. So you basically engage your subject matter experts so that your clients, stakeholders, business managers, process owners to be able to understand what should be the high-level requirement or what should be the business need in this instance. What should be the business and stakeholder needs? Now, the complete set of detailed requirements is then signed off by your stakeholders, and they are used as the Bible throughout the life of the project to support design, to support development, and to support testing. The shall statement, which is a high-level requirement, is called your business requirement or is represented in your business requirement document, your BRD. The BRD basically is a document that outlines the need, the scope, the goals, and the stakeholder requirements of what the initiative aims to achieve. So making mention of BRD, let's look at what BRD is. Business requirement documents are written to define the requirements of a business process or written to define the requirements of a system that needs to support a business process. The BRD contains business requirements that needs to be met, that needs to be fulfilled by the system under development. These requirements specify what the system must do in order to fulfill the requirements of the business. So basically, what should the system do in order to fulfill the requirements of the business? Ideally, in a traditional waterfall environment, that's where we find ourselves doing a lot of business requirement document, which is BRD, writing a lot of BRD. But when we find ourselves in an agile environment, we don't bother ourselves writing BRDs. We just go ahead to start writing user stories. So let me show you guys an example of a BRD. Let me just open a document here. Forgot to open it earlier on. So let me just get them opened. Not here. Not here. Okay, let me go to my resources. It should be here. Okay, so this BRD and this is FRD. So it should open Let BRD open first. Okay, so this is a sample of a BRD for a loan origination solution. So loan origination solution that will allow borrowers to be able to originate a loan, right? Borrow money. Simple, in a layman's language, that will allow everybody to borrow money to only originate a loan. So we have a BRD to that. This is a sample BRD that I prepared for that. So looking at it, we have the front page that talks about what the project is about and who prepared it. Now we now have what we call the document information page or document review page, where we talk about who owns the documents. If this solution is for a client, you put the name of the client here. If it is an internal project, you put the name of your company. Document reference, elicitation results. So the document is this document is referencing results from your elicitation. Revision of the document, basically who authored the document, when was it revised, the signature and date. Document approval, who approves the document, right? So most times it's going to be your team lead that will go ahead to approve, or your stakeholders that will go ahead to approve the document. Now we have introduction, which is the contents, purpose of the document, solution definition, intended audience, current state analysis, envisioned to be, scope, out of scope, process attributes, process ownership, key controls. Key controls helps us to monitor the documents, stakeholder requirements, actors and functions. Under stakeholders requirements, under stakeholders requirements, we have actors and functions, key features, high-level requirements. Then we have the risks, assumptions, and dependencies. So let's go further and look at it in details. So document purpose. The purpose of the document, you basically state it, which is to outline stakeholder requirements that satisfies the business objectives and scope of work for the implementation of a loan origination solution for Uptrust Consulting. This document captures the requirement from the business angle, explaining the needed features that will enable the proposed solution to deliver its expected business value. So we go ahead to define the solution. So the solution, which is the LOS, is a system that will enable small and medium enterprises to apply to a loan facility for their business needs. The system will be designed to cater for loan requests down to loan disbursement and loan performance reporting. The system will be accessible on all devices and will be built in such a manner that it can easily integrate with third-party systems. The LOS will also ride on the advanced machine learning algorithms to perform predictive analysis and credit assessment on loan requests for an efficient loan processing. So you basically come here to define what the solution is going to be about, right? So anybody can come and read this definition to understand what the solution will be about, rather than even before going further to read details of your requirements. Now, intended audience, which audience are you capturing in writing this requirement? We have the product team and we have the development team. Now, current states is that you talk about the current ways that this particular process is being carried out. So this is basically a new initiative by Uptrust. So currently, Uptrust do not have a loan origination solution or loan origination process. They just want to start loan origination. But if, for instance, Uptrust currently does loan origination, right? Uptrust currently, or we say, let me use HR. We are currently hiring, but want to improve our hiring process. In this current situation, we are going to state how our hiring process occurs at the moment. So the current situation, the current state of our hiring process, step by step, we state it in this current situation. So, but for the fact that the current state does not exist, we'll basically state that the current state does not exist. Then the envision, which is the future state, will be that the proposed loan solution will serve a niche market of borrowers, which are SMEs, to enable them effectively book a loan facility with ease and get disbursed within 48 hours. Now, the scope of the solution will be that it needs to be user-friendly and intuitive. It needs to be highly responsive. It needs to be highly secured and easy to use. It should be able to integrate to third party. It should be robust in loan performance reporting. It should be able to cater for loan request processing and approval, even disbursement. It should keep an audit trail, and it will have FAQs. Out of scope is that anything that we did not state in this requirement should be out of scope. Now, process attributes. We're looking at the critical success factors and the key performance measures. So critical success factor for this solution is that it should be available. So availability of the solution is a critical success factor. And how do we measure its availability? It means that for 99% of the time, the system should be up and should have been down. So you should have 99% system up time. Another success factor is that the solution should be user-friendly with good user experience and responsive on all platforms, whether it is mobile, tablet, or PC. To measure that, we say that there should be reduced time to complete tasks. So if the time it takes me to register is maybe just one click, then I'll say it is user-friendly with good user experience, right? Then also one way to measure that as well is that the solution should maintain same quality both on web and mobile platform without loss of data. Another critical success factor is that the solution should be highly secured. So for this kind of solution, way to measure this criteria will be that the website must be secured and not prone to cyber attacks. So if we don't have cyber attacks on the application, it means that it is secured. Another one is ease of integration to third-party solution. And how we measure that is that the solution should be able to easily integrate to third-party system without to allow for the push or pull of data. So if you're able to pull data from a third-party solution or push, or in terms of send data to third-party solution, we can say that the system has passed the criteria of being easily integratable. Now, process ownership, the process is owned by Optrust. Key controls, we have our user acceptance tests that we perform to be able to look at, to be able to ensure that there is effective control on the solution. Now, coming to stakeholder requirements, which is item section 5, 5.1, which is actors and functions, that states the type of actors, that is users and their functions. So we have the super admin, who logs in and log out, who configures the system, who manages all users and have access to audit trail, who also views the reporting, updates the system, and manages a loan. Then we have the borrower, who creates an account, logs in, requests for loan, sets their password. Then we have the approvers, the loan approvers, which is like the loan officers, who basically view loan requests, approve loan requests, and decline loan requests. Now, we now have 5.2 to state the key features of the solution, right? Number one feature is onboarding. Users should be able to onboard on the platform. And to onboard, we have the account creation and the user login. On the next feature we'll be looking at is the loan application module. Under the loan application module, users should be able to request for a loan and also to view the details of their loan. Then another feature is loan processing module, where we perform risk assessments and credit assessments. Another feature is the loan approval module, where we do a maker checker to review a loan and approve it. Another feature is loan disbursement module, and then we have the loan reporting module, the system configuration module, the user management module, the audit trail, and the notification module. Now, our high level requirement, which is our HLR, right, will be stated below. So in our HLR, remember I said your requirement must have an ID. So your HLR, we have your HLR ID, which would help to uniquely identify your each requirement, their description, and their priority, right? So we have LOS HLR 001. LOS stands for Loan Origination Solution. High level requirements number 1, so 001. It says that borrowers should be able to register on the system by providing their company name, company email address, tax identification number, business sector, and password, and the requirement is high. So we go ahead to state all of the requirements that are needed, all of our high-level requirements, give them their unique IDs to ensure that they're uniquely identifiable. This one has a medium priority, right? This one has a medium priority. That means you're not going to do this one first. We'll do the ones that are high in priority. We try to implement them first. Then we go ahead to keep on stating all of our requirements with their various ID and their level of prioritization, right? By the time we are done with that, we now go ahead to talk about the risks, the assumptions, and the dependencies. In the risks, you outline the project risks, and then assumptions, basically you make assumptions on what you feel is true about the project or true about the situation. So end user target audience are available. That means we have our customers available for us to work with. Unnecessary and relevant stakeholder data contents for uploads and integration into the system are available. There is sufficient funding for the project. The project or product development team has necessary domain knowledge for this. And the dependencies is that the implementation of the project is dependent on the final approval of the BRD, and also is also dependent on we acquiring a CBN lending license, which will enable Uptrust to become a licensed lender. So this is an example of a business requirement document, which is a BRD. I don't know if you have any question with regards to BRD before we go to FRD.
No, I'm fine.
Okay. All right. So I'll go back to the slide presentation so that we can take a look at FRD since we've gone through the BRD. So you've seen how basically a BRD is. It speaks on a high level, right? It doesn't go straight to technical terminologies. It gives us high level what the system should be able to do from the stakeholders' points. So giving us the stakeholder requirements, right? Borrower should be able to do this, customer should be able to do this. Now, the next requirements format to be looking at is our FRD. FRD stands for Functional Requirements Documents. And this defines how. Remember that our BRD defines what. FRD will have to now define how the system will accomplish the requirements that have been stated in our BRD by outlining the functionality and features that will be supported by the system. Ideally, the functionalities of the system will be described in logical terms so that the FRD is technologically and platform independent. This gives the developers, engineers, and architects more freedom in making development and design decisions about the physical design of the system. The FRD helps to explain various models and integration points of the system. It also helps to cater necessary business rules and acceptance criteria that we need. The FRD needs to be well detailed to ensure that it will provide sufficient clarity to the technical team that are implementing the solution. So let me open a sample FRD. This sample FRD is the same is the FRD for the loan origination system. So we've looked at the BRD, right? So this is a FRD for a loan origination system, right? Then we have the usual preambles, document information, revision history, approvals. We have our table of contents. Then let's go straight to the introduction. So here we basically introduce, we are not defining, we are basically introducing the system because this document basically speaks to technical stakeholders. So here we basically introduce the system. The purpose of the document is that this document helps to provide technical requirements to the technical team. The objective of the solution, the scope of the solution, we have already stated this before. The success criteria, we've stated this. Now, something that we add, which was not in the business requirement document, will now be the system user group. That means you can call it system actors or users. So group of users, we have borrowers, super admin, and what have you. Now, if you now watch here now, we now have actors. Before we have actors and functions. Here we now have actors, their requirements or linked requirements ID, and their functions. So super admin. Super admin will perform everything that is stated in our BRD that are stated in these requirements under our BRD. So if you go, let's go to BRD LOSHR 028. It speaks to login and log out of the super admin. Let's go there. Let's go back to the BRD document. So this is the BRD document 028, right? 028 and see what it says there. So 028 says admin user should be able to log in with their email address and password, right? So this is what we call tracing your requirements, mapping your requirements to a particular requirement in another document, right? This BRD LOSHR 028 is not in this, the requirement is not in this functional requirement document, it's in our BRD. So we've been able to link or map them in line with what the function of the stakeholder would be, right? Then we have the borrower, their mapped requirements and what their functions would be. Then we have the approvers, their mapped requirements and what their functions will be. We'll go ahead to even give more details by saying the user groups. Which module do they have access to? So borrower will have access to the onboarding module. They also have access to the apply module, and they'll have access to the applicant dashboard module. The approvers will have access to the manage loan module, to the dashboard module, to the reporting module. The super admin will have access to the manage loan module, the reporting module, the user management module, system configuration module, and the audit trail module. So you see that we are becoming a lot more specific and detailed on what we want the users to do and what we want them to see. Now, the dependencies of the project, we basically state them. Then we have our technical diagrams. So we have our context diagram that helps to talk about how the system will relate with external entities or external systems, right? When it comes to context diagram, I'm going to teach people how to draw a context diagram and what it's all about, right? Then you have your context diagram, not just your context diagram, you have your use case diagram. These are all technical diagrams that the developer will be able to understand, or the technical person will be able to understand what you're talking about. We have their use case diagram that talks about the loan origination solution, looking at its interaction with actors, right, within the system boundary. Then we have the process flow that defines how individual processes would be carried out in the loan origination solutions in order for us to get to the end of applying for loan. After that, we now go ahead to start stating our functional requirements. In our functional requirements, we still ensure we maintain our requirement ID of REQ 001, which is requirement 001. Ability to create account and login, ability to have each loan application as a single instance, ability to save and continue loan application, ability to cancel loan application. These are the functional requirements of the solution. So you go ahead to state all of the functional requirements that the solution should have. After that, you go ahead to now do your functional specification for the back-end solution. The onboarding, what should be the requirement? You see here, the requirement ID is FS, which is functional specification, OM, onboarding module 001. Which set of user we have as will be making use of this function? The borrower. What is the requirement? Ability to create accounts with the system with the following credentials. That means borrower should be able to create accounts with these credentials on the system or on the solution. Then we have FS OM 002, which is another requirement ID. FS standing for functional specification. OM standing for onboarding module. 002 means ID number two of this particular requirement. Who have access to this? The borrower. Ability to verify email address upon completing the account creation form. So we go on and on to state for the onboarding module the functional requirement. By the time we are done with that, we now state the acceptance criteria or the business rule for that particular module. So onboarding module, which is OM business rules, we come here. Number one business rule is that upon creating an account, the borrower automatically accepts the terms and conditions of the application process. Another business rule is that the system should validate that the email address does not currently exist with another account holder. And then another acceptance criteria is that the password characters must include this criteria. We must ensure we satisfy this criteria for us to say that a password is acceptable. So it must have uppercase, lowercase, and a special character. The password must not be less than 6 characters, must not be more than 10 characters. Another acceptance criteria of business rule is that without email verification, the account creation process cannot be completed. Another one is that the email address and password must be correct and belong to a single user when they are trying to log in. Another acceptance criteria or business rule is that for all users except applicants, upon their first login, the system should force password change or password reset. So that is it for the onboarding module. What the specifications for the onboarding module are and what the business rules are. Now, we now have the apply module. On the apply module, which is where the borrower will go ahead to apply, we now have the requirement ID, FS, functional specification, AP, apply module, 001, borrower ability to create an account, ability to log in with their credentials, ability to recover their password, and ability to fill application form on fields, which must be modeled according to the form attached. So there's a form attached there. Once I click the form, it will open this particular requirement, right? Then we go ahead to also keep on specifying all of the requirements for the apply module and also the business rules or acceptance criteria for this apply module. Then the next module, which is the borrower dashboard module, what the requirement is about, the ID and the user group that are involved in that. We go ahead to state the business rules. Then we go to the admin dashboard module. What the requirement is FSDM001, the user group, and then the requirements, ability to view all of these metrics. Now we now go to the admin reporting module, FSAR001. User group is admin, what they should be able to see in the reporting module. We do that for all of the modules that we have identified. We have the user management module. We state the requirement for that particular module as well, and also the business rule. We have the system configuration module, SCM. We state the requirements for that and the business rule. Then we have the manage loan module or loan management module, right? So FSML001 admin, and also we have the approvers being able to use that along with their requirements. Then we have the audit trail module. We state the requirements for those modules with their requirements ID and their user group. So that helps us to understand what the functional specification. You see how detailed this particular document is compared to your BRD that is just high level. Just talks about what the system should be able to do on what the users can do on a high level. But this one will go into details stating the specific things that needs to be done at each phase. Then we have the non-functional requirements. Just as I was teaching you, when I taught you guys characteristics, classifications of requirement, and I said we have solution requirements, right? Under solution, we have functional and non-functional. So we state the functional requirements, and then the non-functional requirements, we talk about security requirements, we talk about communication requirements, and all that types of requirements. So that is it when we talk about FRDs. I don't know if you have any question on FRDs, if it's all clear to you guys.
FRDs. Hello, sir.
I can hear you.
How best are we going to present them? Should they be presented in tabular form or theoretically?
You have to keep it in this tabular form. on a Word document? You have to keep it on a tabular form on a Word document. That is the best way you can present it. Keep it in a tabular form on a Word document. You can also use an Excel sheet, but the thing is that Excel sheet will not enable you to write a lot of things, except maybe in the tabular section that Excel sheet will be helpful or harmful. But the best thing, our FRDs are always Word documents. They can always be Word documents. Any other question? So don't be scared about what you are seeing. When will I learn to write all of this? I never learned to write them in a day, but with constant practice and work, you'll be able to find ways to write all of this. You get used to it. You even become proficient in writing functional requirements with ease. So don't be scared of all these things. When will I learn it? And you don't just get all this information on your own. Remember, you do what they call, you do your requirements gathering to understand the requirements. And it's from your requirements gathering that you now be able to come up with your BRD. From your BRD, you come up with your FRD. So you don't just wake up and have all these things documented. You basically get them from stakeholders who you are working with in the course of the project. Okay. Nusira, are you there?
Yes, I am.
All right.
I'm here.
Hope it's not scary to you.
It's just I'm just quiet. I'm still I'm taking it in.
Okay. So let's go ahead to the next one that talks about requirement documentation. To the next requirement documentation format, which is SRS. So I won't be showing you guys SR because most times we don't really present SRS. SRS most times is presented by the clients when they tell us what they want. But in terms of knowledge, SRS stands for Software Requirement Specification, right? Is a description of an organization's understanding of customers or a potential client system requirement and dependencies. Its initial purpose is to ensure that the provider understands the customer's or client's requirements prior to any actual design or development. The SRS states in precise and explicit language all functions and capabilities, as well as the constraints by which the software system must abide. It functions as a blueprint for completing a project with as little cost growth as possible. So that is it for SRS. Then another requirement format, which this particular one, we are going to take a look at it in detail next week. It's epics and user stories. For epics and user stories, epics basically is a large body of work, right? So let's say we in our loan origination mode, we can call an epic of onboarding. Onboarding could be an epic. Under onboarding, we have account creation, we have sign up, we have login. They are all part of onboarding, right? So an onboarding could be an epic. Another example of epic could be maybe something that could relate to application, right? Loan application or loan forms, the form of the loans, the loan application forms and all of that. That could be another epic. So an epic is a large body of work, while a user story basically states in details, or should I say user story is a broken format of an epic. So user story helps to break an epic into different formats. A Gherkin syntax in this instance is an acceptance criteria, just as we have business rules when we are looking at this. So a Gherkin syntax is an acceptance criteria that helps to explain conditions or criteria that must be fulfilled for user story to be valid, right? And each of these, they all have their structure. So don't bother yourself about user stories. Next week, we'll take a look at user stories in details, okay? So I want to end the class today so that we can go ahead to do other things. Next week, we're going to have a roller coaster session in looking at requirement specification. How do we write requirements, functional requirements? We look at each and every one of them in detail. So use cases, user stories, user story map, acceptance criteria, functional decomposition, non-functional requirements, and what have you. Okay, so this is where we draw the curtain for the class for today. I don't know if you have any questions. I'll be very much glad to entertain all of our questions.